Hi, it's Laura. Independent media is a collaborative project, and you play a critical part in it. This show is made possible by our viewers and listeners, not corporations or advertisers. So join our member supporter honor roll by going to lauraflanders.org/donate to contribute. That's lauraflanders.org/donate. And please stay kind, stay curious, and commit to supporting this no ads, no gimmicks, not all about profit show, again, or for the very first time. Thank you. Now on with this week's show.
Something spoke to my heart, and I heard one word: organize. Had no idea what that meant. And ever since then, we've been organizing.
We have power in numbers that people are just realizing. And people power will always win over organized money and powerful people and all of that.
They're having some temporary victories, and we're having some now through the courts, but this is going to be a long battle.
After decades of struggle around the balance of power between workers and employers, during the second Trump administration, we're witnessing a shift. The Republican regime moved quickly, stripping collective bargaining rights from most federal union workers, appointing employer-friendly officials to the National Labor Relations Board, and making it harder for workers to form or join unions. There are efforts afoot, too, to privatize government jobs and restrict unemployment benefits. So how are workers and their organizations responding? And how do their struggles intersect with others, like those we're seeing on U.S. college campuses? To find out more, we attended a labor conference on working-class politics in an age of authoritarianism, held this spring at the CUNY School of Labor and Urban Studies right here in New York City. Becky Pringle, president of the National Education Association, kicked things off.
This is a coordinated power grab by billionaires and extremists. They are mercilessly targeting and scapegoating the vulnerable. They're attempting to enter schools under false pretenses, whitewashing and rewriting history. I know that you were paying attention to the news when the Oklahoma standards were released, and teachers are now required to teach that the 2020 election was stolen. Why are Donald Trump and his cronies attacking public education? Why? Well, you and I know why. Because they know that public education is where democracy actually takes root and is allowed, if it can, to grow and flourish. Because critical thinking and collaborative problem solving and civic understanding are all threats to an authoritarian rule. They know that if they can control what we know, they can control what we believe and what we do.
A former middle school science teacher, Pringle represents 3 million people who work in higher education, both faculty and staff, many of whom are already feeling the impact of the new Republican regime, as she explained when we talked backstage.
Our members all over the country are obviously worried. They're overwhelmed. They are frightened about what will happen for their students and to their schools, and so many of them are already experiencing cuts from the Trump administration that are very, very real for them. Larger class sizes, and fewer educators, and the threats to after-school programs and summer school programs, the opportunities for their kids to, after they've done everything we've asked them to do, and they want to go on to college, they can't. They can't do it. So they are rightly concerned about what the Trump administration has done to diminish public education, to try to destroy it honestly, and to diminish them as educators. Let me tell you, as educators and as a union, we do feel the weight on us. You can study any authoritarian reign, any oligarch throughout history, and you know that the people who fight have the most success in fighting against them are educators, and they are unionists. And so with that intersection for us, we feel that responsibility. And we understand that this is a multi-pronged, these are multi-pronged attacks on every front. So we have to actually have a multi-pronged approach. And for educators, so where do you think it begins? Education. And then we have to communicate. We have to talk to all kinds of people because Donald Trump is hurting all kinds of people. They may not know it yet, but he is.
How has the NEA responded thus far, and what would you lift up or single out as your most successful wins?
We, the NEA, have been litigating. We just won a case last week, an injunction to stop this government from threatening school districts with teaching diversity and equity and inclusion and access in ways that we know our students need to learn. So we know that litigation is a powerful tool, but we can't stop with litigation. We have power in numbers that people are just realizing. And people power will always win over organized money and powerful people and all of that.
In Utah, after the legislature passed legislation taking bargaining rights from public workers, the Utah Education Association led an effort that collected so many signatures on a ballot measure that, in an unusual move, the lieutenant governor declared that the law would not be implemented.
So in Utah, the reddest of red, right? But we believe. And we got together, and unions, our union, the Utah Education Association, led the efforts with our financial and strategic support, and reached out to labor unions across that state and across the country, and they came. They came in solidarity. What they try to do is divide us. And especially with union-related laws, they try to carve out the police, or they carve out the firefighters. In this instance, they had a carve out for the firefighters. And the firefighters said, no, we are going to fight you because our brothers and sisters deserve it too. And they worked with us. They were a strong part of our coalition and helped us win.
Is that what you mean by solidarity as a verb?
That is exactly what I mean by solidarity as a verb.
I've noticed that you don't use the acronym DEI. Why?
As this Trump administration tries to demonize what are the core values of our country and diminish it to letters, DEI or DIA, I've just been saying to folks, say the words. Say the words. Diversity. That is the strength and the uniqueness of the United States of America. Say the words. Equity is just a way to make sure that every student gets what they need when they need it. Inclusion is part of the fabric of this nation so that we can see each other and we can see ourselves. That's how we build a just society. And access. That means that every one of our students, everyone, whether they have disabilities or whether they are in a geographic location, a rural area, they have the access to the same tools and resources and educators and opportunities that everyone should have access to, because we actually believe it is we the people. We the people. All of us deserve that right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
The attacks Republicans are pushing now didn't start at the federal level. Sherman Henry and Robert Cassanello came to New York from the South, which has been a petri dish for regressive policy given the low level of union density in that region. Back in 2022, Cassanello was one of the plaintiffs in a lawsuit against the so-called Stop Woke Act, a Florida state law signed by Governor Ron DeSantis, which prohibited schools and businesses from teaching certain concepts related to race, gender, racism, and social privilege.
Florida's kind of a bellwether in a lot of ways because Florida's been captured by conservative lawmakers who, have nothing but antipathy for unions, and the same for higher ed. So there's kind of a confluence here. If we look at the colleges, public colleges and universities in Florida, that these attacks are sort of, many-fold, and, in one way they're attacking higher ed workers as workers, and they're also attacking higher ed workers as teachers and instructors.
Sherman Henry runs the Advancing Black Strategist Labor Institute at Clark Atlanta University, which is the first HBCU with a program specifically about labor in the South.
I think the trend, going back to kind of the Southern strategy of having a master-servant relationship in the workplace, and going back to poverty wages, where there's no voice of democracy, there's no bargaining, it's just my way or the highway. So if you start to dismantle collective bargaining, then you're back at that cultural norm where it's the boss word as that will employee versus just cause and bargaining over rights and benefits in the workplace. And this generation, just because it's, you still have about 95% of the workforce in the South, especially in Florida, with no bargaining rights, both public and private. So it then becomes just a total corporate agenda.
I think what's being reinforced here on the part of right-wing politicians is this idea of civil obedience. And you see it not only in regards to the prohibitions against teaching race and gender, sexuality, but if you read those materials, what they're really trying to do is they're trying to make a passive citizenry. And so if you read their materials, you don't see anything about the civil rights movement. You don't see anything about the labor movement. You really see things about how can you use private associations in your community to solve problems. Oh, what about the government solving problems? You really don't see any of that being addressed. Because I think what those materials are trying to do, as well as this legislation is trying to do, is to make a passive citizen, an obedient citizen. And I think that's what this is all about.
So is it working?
It's working in that people are feeling intimidated. I know, my colleagues, like if we take what's been going on in the state of Florida, when Stop Woke passed in 2022, I knew a lot of colleagues of mine, a lot of friends of mine in academia who were just like, no more, this is the line in the sand. We're going to stand up, we're going to say something, we can't take this. And then, a year later, when some further legislation along that line was passed, along with the elimination of tenure, all of a sudden people who had tenure who were willing to speak out were a little bit more reluctant. So in that regard, yeah, it's working because the intimidation is really kind of setting in.
You think it's working, Sherman?
Yeah, I think he's right. And I think just the evidence in itself on the legislative actions, and these folks continue to be reelected. When you see the gerrymandering of congressional districts having these temporary victories, and they get to set the public policies that they imagine, which is to reimagine democracy in the way that they want it to be. So yeah, they're having some temporary victories, and we're having some now through the courts, but this is going to be a long battle.
This is Laura Flanders and Friends with a special report on working class politics in a time of authoritarianism. Recorded at a conference held at the City University of New York's School of Labor and Urban Studies in New York this May. Laura is speaking with history professor Robert Casanello, the president of United Faculty of Florida, and Sherman Henry, the director of the Labor Institute for Advancing Black Strategies at Clark Atlanta University. Next, they discuss the brave new leaders stepping up in this political climate. And we'll hear from 2 CUNY social practice fellows about Give Light, a pop-up exhibition celebrating labor movement history and more. You can watch this special report and see some of the art from that exhibit and much more at lauraflanders.org. While you're there, please sign up for our newsletter to receive information on all of our web exclusives, including an exclusive conversation featuring former union organizer turned In These Times editor Alex Hahn and longtime right-wing analyst Tarso Ramos. That's available to our podcast subscribers. Now, back to our special report.
You both work with the leaders of tomorrow. What are you seeing in terms of leadership bubbling up today?
Sherman Henry, the director of the Labor Institute for Advancing Black Strategies at Clark Atlanta University.
As we heard here at this conference with the president of NEA, Sister Pringle, they're starting to reimagine leadership development and how we talk about the political season that we're in from a practical perspective. And we're not shying away from talking about race and political partisanship as relates to workers voting against their interests. So the response is we have to educate people and educate them in a truthful way.
Robert Casanello, president of United Faculty of Florida.
On the surface of it, it seems like these attacks on academic freedom really are primarily targeted at professors, and they are. But students are really, the center of that, because it's the lawmakers who don't want these students to learn certain concepts and don't want them to be, exposed to things that are uncomfortable, exposed to things that might get them to question their government and the things that they're being told. And so I know, like for me, when I talk to students about these threats to academic freedom. They really kind of understand it on a personal level. And I had one experience that I shared with people in that a student from our Student Government Association came to me and asked me what she could do. And I said, have you thought about a student government resolution condemning, Stop Woke, the legislation that Governor DeSantis passed? And she said, that's a great idea. It took a year, but a year later she got the Student Government Association at the University of Central Florida to pass that resolution, condemn the actions of the Florida legislature, of Governor DeSantis, and say, keep your hands off our education. The students kind of taking it upon themselves to say, this is our education. Do not come between me and my professor. And that's really was the message that was there, and I think that is really kind of salient.
So the institute that I'm now leading is our contribution in educating folks, engaging folks, and going back out into the community like we did during the civil rights era, and just having a frank conversation about the economy, democracy, and how you and your family fit into this equation. As we reimagine democracy, is first really having a conversation about what is democracy, because it's interpreted differently by folks depending on where you're at. And the African American community and the other communities of color don't necessarily see it in the same way. So we have to connect the two, democracy and economy.
Connecting and communicating aren't only done through speeches and words. Annabelle Heckler is part of an artist collective called Mi Casa Resiste, which collaborated with other activist artists in New York on an exhibition they called Give Light, labor drawings, posters, art, and graphics from movements celebrating labor history, people's art, and popular liberation. Mudiwa Pettus is an assistant professor of English composition and rhetoric at Medgar Evers College.
Annabelle Heckler.
We drew our inspiration from Ella Baker's quote, give light and people will find the way. And we think that at this moment, especially, visual arts and culture are an essential part of social movements.
Dr. Mudiwa Pettus.
My specialty is Black rhetorical education, so thinking about particularly how Black people practice performances of expression for personhood, right? So thinking about what are the ways that people can actually practice and cultivate their individual forms of expression, but also to think about how they can also support the expressions of people in their community, regardless of perspectives and viewpoints and backgrounds, and actually creating a space where people feel empowered and entitled to express themselves, but also to consider the expression of other people.
There was certainly a lot of public funding and public support in the 1930s for arts in a way that it's also, our art is really dangerous. It allows us to imagine freedoms and to imagine connections to each other that we might not otherwise. So it's not as widely publicly funded in this moment and context. But I do think we see a beautiful outpouring of art today if you look at sort of people's posters in solidarity with Palestine that have proliferated in the last 2 years. I think there's new ways of creating and new ways of sharing with each other that are really powerful today.
So empowering everyday, organic, grounded movements to actually think about what does it mean to actually mobilize everyone in the community and not just think that there are these exceptional rhetorical leaders, visibly legible to people who are kind of always looking for superstars. And so I think this idea that art for oneself and art for one's community members is super important.
It's really cool, actually. It's already, even as we yesterday had all of the posters spread out on the floor and we were picking what order and what thematic groupings they were gonna go in, people coming off the elevator kept being like, it's lovely to see beauty in your day-to-day and to see beauty that encourages you to think a little bit beyond the limits of this time in which we live.
To many workers, the threats they're facing today come as a shock. But for warehouse workers in the South, their lives were never more endangered than during the COVID pandemic. Still, they fought and organized and stood up for their rights. Reverend Ryan Brown is the president and one of the co-founders of Carolina Amazonians United for Solidarity and Empowerment, or CORS, which works with Amazon workers based in Garner, North Carolina, who've been organizing at Amazon for years.
CORS was birthed during the pandemic. I was asked to go to a part of the warehouse that we knew was a COVID hotspot. It wasn't because Amazon told us. Workers, we came together and we developed our own communication systems to keep one another safe. This area that I was asked to go to, I was told I didn't have no choice. And I left, I clocked out because it just didn't feel right. It felt immoral. It felt demeaning. It felt like an old demon of that I have never felt in my life until that point. So I wrote a very long letter to our general manager, and I posted it on this platform, a virtual platform called The Voice of the Associate, where everybody in that building could see. And arrived to campus the next day, went to his office for a private audience. And when I left there, out of that office, my spirit and my soul was so unsettled that I clocked out again and went home. When I went home this time, for the first time in a very long time in my life, I remembered that my grandmother taught me to pray. And I literally got on my knees and just started praying to the God of my grandmother and my ancestors. And seemingly enough, I know as strange as this sounds, but it's just as real as the two of us are sitting having this conversation now. Something spoke to my heart, and I heard one word: organize. Had no idea what that meant. And ever since then, we've been organizing.
And what have been the results?
The results have been they have been positive results. We had an election, as you know. And again, that's not a small feat in North Carolina, in a town that no one knows. And we had an election. We lost the election, but did we really lose the election? That was just the beginning of the process. That was to create a conversation. That was to start the fire. That hey, you know, you don't have to put up with this. You know what? That we do deserve living wages. We do deserve better working conditions. That's just the first round. We're reimagining, reorganizing what this movement actually looks like for Amazon workers.
What's your message to people today who feel like fascism, authoritarianism is making it difficult for them to even imagine a better future?
Solomon said that there is nothing new under the sun. This is nothing new. We are living in some perilous times. Make no mistake about it. But it's not the first time that our species have lived in perilous times with pharaohs who are giving people work without any brick, without any straw. This is nothing new. What is the best of our tradition? What have they always done? They have always figured out a way to organize, to mobilize, and to agitate. And those very people that we look up to in history, regardless of who that individual may be, for me personally, That's folks like Harriet Tubman. That's folks like Fannie Lou Hamer. If you just take those two, and I can stop right there, they were just regular, everyday human beings, no education. But they knew that fundamentally something was wrong about the world or the context that they were living in. And Emerson says, to be great is to be misunderstood. That's why we still talk about them today. They were just regular people. And it may seem like a very big world, but what separated them? It was the resilience and it was the faith. And that's how Cause operates. That's how we move. And that's what I would suggest to you.
Resilience, faith, and organize.
Yes.
So today's conversation has me thinking a lot about the relationship between authoritarianism and fascism and economics. We talk a lot about the social agenda of fascism, but what about the economic plan? The person who put the connection most clearly, to my mind, at this event was Baravi Desai of the Taxi Workers Alliance. The attacks on democracy have an economic agenda, she said. They're about suppressing the ability of an individual or a community to improve their economic lives. The attacks on education have an economic agenda, too. The students of today are the workers of tomorrow. They don't call it a classroom for nothing, she said.
Without a class analysis, without an economic analysis or a critique of capitalism, we cannot understand this moment of authoritarianism. And the most organized base of workers who day to day live out capitalism, debate capitalism, think through capitalism, find ways of fighting economic inequality are working people. And unions are critical in this fight because it's our job to organize the working people and the working class and to really develop that consciousness around these issues.
So the role of organized workers in expanding our democracy or accepting its contraction is huge. Organized labor plays a huge role in improving our chances of fighting fascism today and tomorrow, as it has in the past. So what will we see in this moment, in our time? Well, the other lesson from this conference has been the longness of history, the long span of the struggle. Some of the art we saw reminded me of that. We'll continue to cover this connection on the show, and I hope that you'll stay with us. You can find all our archives through looking at our website and get all our unedited conversations through subscribing to our free podcast. All the information's at that website. Till the next time, stay kind, stay curious. For Laura Flanders and friends, I'm Laura. Thanks for joining us.
For more information on this episode, check out our show notes posted for free at patreon.com/Laura Flanders and Friends. And we invite you to subscribe to our YouTube channel to watch the premiere of each week's show and chat in real time with Laura. The premiere now airs on Fridays at 5 p.m. Eastern. Thanks to our member supporters, this show remains free to millions on public TV, community radio, and as a podcast. Not a member yet? Make a one-time donation or make it monthly at lauraflanders.org.
This show is produced by yours truly, Laura Flanders, along with Sabrina Artel, Jeremiah Cothran, Veronica Delgado, Jeanette Hernandez, Jeannie Hopper, Sarah Miller, Nat Needham, David Neumann, and Rory O'Connor.
Thanks for joining us.